Hey y'all, we are back for foundational anatomy part 5, the endocrine system. So we worked through basic anatomy, musculoskeletal system, the respiratory system, and the nervous system. So now we're going to talk about the endocrine system, which works in combination with the nervous system to really regulate our bodily functions, keep us in a state of homeostasis. So let's jump right in. Oops. Maybe. All right. So here we go. What is the endocrine system? Well, let's pull up a cool picture of it here. Here we go. The endocrine system is truly a complex network of glands that produce, store, and release hormones. Each gland produces one or more hormones, and those hormones go on to target specific organs and tissues in the body. So you can see here a variety of different glands. We're going to talk about all these glands. So what's the overall function of these hormones, the glands and the hormones? Like, what do they do? Well, they do a lot of things, y'all, a lot of things. So they regulate metabolism, they help regulate calcium in the blood, they secrete sex hormones and help with fertility and sexual function. They help with emotions and mood. They help with sleep regulation. They help with blood pressure and growth and development. And I think I said metabolism. So lots and lots and lots of things that they do. And what are the parts? Well, you know what? We can keep that up. So you have well, actually, let's pull up. We have a different one we're going to pull up, I think is a little bit better. So what are the parts? Again, super simplified, but we're going to go through. So it's a bunch of glands. And we'll start at the top here. So we have the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland. So we're going to talk a lot about these two, the pineal gland. And then you have down here in the neck, you have your thyroid gland and your parathyroid. And then you come down here to the thymus, which this really, just so you know, we aren't going to actually talk about this today at all, but it is the one thing that helps. It helps to initiate our immune system when we're younger, and it undergoes atrophy in our adulthood. So it doesn't function nearly as much as it does when we're younger. And then we have, the heart, you can kind of consider it part of the endocrine system. It does release some particular peptides. But really, we're not going to really talk about the heart today as part of the endocrine system, more just the glandular spaces. So the adrenal glands and the gonads. And I think we said thyroid, parathyroid. Yep. Oh, and then the pancreas. Where's the pancreas? Right here. Here's the pancreas, right? So, and by gonads, we mean the sexual reproductive organs. Okay. So there we go. Those are the parts. So now let's go talk about each of those glands. So we'll start with the hypothalamus, this guy here in the brain. So it's located in the brain, and it along with the pituitary gland really control the endocrine system. It helps to maintain our body's homeostasis. So it includes a ton of processes really through connection through the pituitary gland. So mood, hunger, thirst, sleep, sexual function. And it helps the hypothalamus and the pituitary are really the link between the endocrine and the nervous system. So remember, in the nervous system, we talked about the endocrine system, that those two systems together help to regulate the homeostasis of the body. Well, this is the place where we see this intermingling. And there are a couple other places as well, but this is a big one. So it receives information from nearly all parts of the nervous system as well as the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus has these sort of feedback loops with the endocrine system, and the nervous system inputs to it too. It produces what hormones that allow other hormones to be released, and it produces hormones that inhibit other hormones from being released. So we'll go over those in just a second. So it uses the information that it gets back. So what's coming to it, it goes, okay, I need to give more. I need more of this hormone released, or we're at good capacity. I'm not going to have any more release. So I'm going to release this other hormone to stop releasing that hormone. And it talks intimately with the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus, you do not need to remember any of these hormones, just so you know, but just so it releases thyrotropin releasing hormone, dopamine, growth hormone releasing hormone. And this is not, this is interesting because it's not growth hormone, it's the hormone that helps to release growth hormone, right? So growth hormone releasing hormone. Somatostatin, which has to do with blood pressure, gonadotropin releasing hormone, which has to do with your gonads, your sexual reproductive organs, corticotropin releasing hormone, which has to do with a couple of the different things. Oxytocin, oxytocin is the one that we like to talk about as the feel-good hormone. It goes up when you hug someone. And then vasopressin helps to regulate blood pressure as well. All right, so that's the hypothalamus, big player. An even bigger player is our pituitary gland. So this is sometimes referred to as the master gland. So it's really tiny. It's only about the size of a pea, like literally. It's really, really, really tiny, but has a big job. So it makes the hormones that control many of the other glands, including the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, the ovaries, the testes. And it is in charge of so many different functions, So you can see here that as a result of what's happening at the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland then opens up the floodgates for all of these additional hormones that are going to be released into the system. And let's see here. We'll look at this particular diagram. So the hypothalamus and the pituitary sit in relation to each other, sit right next to each other in the brain. And we may look at that in the complete anatomy. But they're here in this area of the brain. Here it's blown up. So here's the hypothalamus, here's the pituitary. Now we have what we call the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. So that just means the front portion of the pituitary and the back portion of the pituitary. It's all the pituitary, but it's interesting because certain things are released from the anterior pituitary and certain things are released from the posterior pituitary. So remember these guys? These are the neurons. This is where we have this intersection of the nervous system in the hypothalamus as well as the pituitary. And so that gets some signals from the nerves as well as signals from the system, the endocrine system itself. And the anterior pituitary, when it gets the signal, it releases all of these hormones. So it releases prolactin, which helps to produce milk, the gonadotropins, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, LH, which help produce the gametes and hormones inside of the ovaries and the testes. Thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. Many of you, if you've had your thyroid tested, you'll see that this is the hormone that we test for. Stimulates the thyroid gland to increase the rate of metabolism. It releases ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone, which stimulates the adrenal cortex, which allows the body to then help regulate fluid balance and cope with stress. And as I'm going through this, just know that when when the pituitary releases these, most of these glands are then going to release secondary or tertiary, really, hormones. So for instance, the thyroid, TSH says to the thyroid, okay, we need T4, T3, and then subsequently T4. And so that's what then happens. And then when we come to the adrenal cortex, when the ACTH comes to the adrenal cortex then releases additional, we call them glucocorticoids and mineralocorticoids. Those are additional hormones. Then the pituitary also releases growth hormone, which helps with muscle, bone, and other tissue. Then we have the melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, so gives the color to the skin. So this, it happens when we a different, it allows us to have, all of us to have different skin tones to our skin, and also causes the darkening of skin in conjunction with the sunlight. That was a lot. I don't know why I couldn't get that sentence out. And then it also releases endorphins. So this helps with the pain, helps to modulate our pain. And additionally, we have from the posterior pituitary, we have oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. There also is vasopressin that's here, and I think that's it. And just know that when we talk about endorphins, what we're talking about is this interesting combination. They are hormones, but they're also considered like neurotransmitters. There's a little bit of interplay there. Okay, so that's the pituitary gland, master gland. Whoa, doing so much, right? So much. All right, so now let's go on and let's take a peek at more of these glands that are actually affected by the pituitary gland. So the adrenals, so we talked about the adrenals, right? The adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys, and they are responsible for lots of different things. Now, there's two different parts to the adrenal. So there's the outer part, and then there's the inner part. So you have the medulla and the cortex. You don't have to remember that. But these different parts release different things. And the medulla is actually stimulated, not necessarily by the pituitary gland, but by the sympathetic nervous system. So here's another example of the nervous system and the endocrine system coming together. And when the sympathetic nervous system gets activated, what happens is you see this release of norepinephrine and epinephrine into the body. So those are neurotransmitters that we're talking about. And then what we have is the adrenal cortex, which is something that's called the HPA, or hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. This is a real important one. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but the adrenal cortex releases the glucocorticoids, the mineralocorticoids, and sex hormones. So glucocorticoids, there's a couple, but ultimately the one that you'll recognize is cortisol. And that is what you hear all the time related to as the stress hormone. When cortisol is high, cortisol is really good for us when we're in a needed state of sympathetic activation, when there really is a very serious threat to ourselves and we need to either fight or flight. But cortisol upregulated or in high levels throughout the body on a chronic basis can be very damaging to our body. And then mineralocorticoids, aldosterone, this has to do with absorbed water and the sex hormones. So the adrenals control essentially our metabolism, our blood pressure, some part of sexual development, and our response to stress. Then we have the thyroid. So we saw the little guy right up here. That's that gland that's right here in front of the neck. And it's responsible for metabolism. So it gets stimulated by TSH, and then it releases additional hormones. T3, T4. There's a conversion that happens, but you don't need to know that. And then the parathyroid. So the parathyroid there's actually 4 tiny little glands that sit on the posterior portion of the thyroid. I think we had it up here. Yep. So make that bigger. You can see here, I guess they don't really show you, but it's on the thyroid. Anyway, that is responsible for regulating your levels of calcium in the body. And calcium is extraordinarily important for a host of different reasons. It helps with the signaling of our heart, what's happening in the kidneys, bone growth and strength, and also with the nervous system. You saw that a little bit when we looked at the synapse, where the neurotransmitter got transferred between the presynaptic and postsynaptic cleft. So we really need the right amount of calcium. So that's what the parathyroid's for. And then we have the pineal gland. And the pineal gland is up in the brain, close to where the pituitary and the hypothalamus is. And the pineal gland is the one that manages our sleep cycle. So by regulating our melatonin. And there's an interesting play I wanted to talk about between melatonin and cortisol. So we often talk about this thing called circadian rhythm. So our body has this natural built-in rhythm that we are used to. And the circadian rhythm that's associated with our sleep is this cycle of melatonin and cortisol, typically related to light during the morning and the evening. So when we're looking at that, you can see this nice, I really like this graph here. So the blue line represents cortisol and the red line represents melatonin. And you can see during the day, what happens is usually cortisol will go up. Now, cortisol is up. It's what we need. It helps us to move energetically throughout our day. We did mention cortisol being inappropriately elevated, and it can stay elevated. What can happen is that it doesn't have this sort of natural drop that happens and actually can become even higher than what normal is for us. But when things are working right and working well, and you have good homeostasis in the body, the cortisol peaks here early in the morning and then slowly starts to decline throughout the day and starts to come down in the evening and then starts to come back up as we come into our awake time. Subsequently, what's happening is melatonin is coming down and it's at its lowest point during our waking hours. And then it starts to increase at this point here, and it starts to increase and will be up throughout our sleeping hours, and then starts to taper off as that cortisol starts to come up. So that's what you'd like to be happening normally in our body. But when typically we're under this state of chronic stress, what happens is this cortisol gets dysregulated and can really affect this cycle. And the melatonin doesn't get an opportunity to get up high enough to sort of put us into a state of sleepiness. And this is just another nice graph showing it in a different way. Okay, now the next gland we want to look at is the pancreas. So the pancreas is located in the abdomen, and it has an interplay with the digestive system and the nervous system a little bit. The pancreas makes insulin, which controls blood sugar levels. So really important for our digestion. And then we have, lastly, the ones that we're going to talk about, the ovaries and the testes. There's 2 of each, so 2 ovaries and 2 testes. The ovaries are stimulated by the FSH and the LH, as well as the testes, and we release our sex hormones, which are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone from the ovaries, and then testosterone from the testes. It also produces sperm. And that is really, that's the depth that we're going to take it. And I think the big take home here is that there's a lot of glands. They're doing a lot of things. The hypothalamus and the pituitary interact tremendously. The pituitary is really this sort of master gland, sort of controlling a whole host of things. And that the way that this is regulated, we're not going to go in that depth, but the way it's regulated is typically there's this feedback loop. So as the hormone goes up, and the body receives exactly what it needs. It signals the glands that have been that have been releasing the hormone itself, or the hormones causing the hormones to be releases. And they have these feedback loops where it says, okay, I'm good. We have enough in the system now. You don't have to release anymore. So it sort of has this beautiful regulatory system. All right, in the next video, we're going to talk about what the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA. And we're going to correlate that, our cortisol, back to our stress and do our stress response. So we'll see you there.